one aspect which works very beautifully in India but may possibly not work somewhere else is the Indian concept of jugaad. When you are new in a certain environment, you are faced with an overload of information and work by itself. Over a point of time, I realized that this was something which was not unique only to me. It's very, very important to keep learning, keep listening to your customer. There lies the root of the solution, just to keep listening.
Hello and welcome to Why Leadership Fails, a podcast where there is no typical gyan, no stereotypical tales of glory. Instead, we bring to you unfiltered, unscripted conversations about real-life experiences of leaders embracing failures, navigating challenges, and thus redefining success. I am your host, Bhavna Lalchandani, VP Digital Business at Hindustan Times. Today we have a leader who has had a transformative journey, has embraced change by taking up diverse roles across companies such as Mediacom, Google India, Google Japan, and Disney Star India. Stay with us as we explore how this transformative journey has actually evolved, what are the challenges and setbacks, as well as, most importantly, understand what goes behind managing multidisciplinary and multicultural teams. Let's welcome Mr. Hemen Desai, Executive Director, Product and Revenue Strategy at Disney Star India. Hi Hemen, lovely to have you here.
Hi Bhavna, nice to be here.
So Hemen, speaking about your journey and reflecting back, right, through the overall role shifts that you had, right from managing agency as a managing director to strategic partnerships at Google and now leading the product and the revenue strategy. How has that actually evolved and what led you to the career pivots?
Okay, to answer that, let's say that there are two kinds of people, okay? The first ones are those who already have a well-defined career path. They know what their career objective is and they know what's their plan to get there. I would call them fairly fortunate because they have a well mapped out route in terms of what they want to achieve. Let's say if you were to imagine the game of archery, they are aiming for the bullseye, so to speak. And then there is another category of people, let's call them type B. They are the ones who kind of shoot the arrow and then they draw concentric circles around where the arrow has landed. For me, I believe I fall in that type, which is to make the most of the opportunities that comes one's way rather than plan for the future. I personally have always been interested in the world of media and communications, and that's the field that I have been in for a very long time. But for my career, which you called out in my introduction, was there any pre-plan to go through this journey? Not really. What I have been seeking out for is essentially new experiences, new challenges, and the way I evaluated each time one of these opportunities came my way was to look at whether it would aid my professional growth as well as whether it would really help me stretch my personal boundaries. Okay. If I were to kind of go back a little bit into the past and when I started my journey in the world of media planning, I moved from a fairly large portfolio of brands that I was handling in Mindshare in Mumbai and took on a very different responsibility in Bangalore for the same advertiser Unilever, but on a much smaller portfolio of brands. But that shift from a large office to a satellite office, okay, actually gave me the opportunity to experience how to run an office, which was an opportunity which I would have got if I would have continued being in Bombay, where I would be a small part of a large ecosystem. When I made the shift from running the Procter & Gamble India AOR to take on the role of country manager at Mediacom Japan, I took a chance. It was a risk of moving to a new market where the deliverables of that role, and that role was that of a country manager, were therefore that much more tougher. I was going to work in an environment where I wouldn't know anybody. The language was alien to me, and of course I hadn't experienced anything about Japanese culture at that point of time. But I'm really glad that I took that on, because I believe that opportunity is something which most people aspire for, but it rarely comes people's way. And I think I made the most of what I did over there. When I made the shift to come back to India from what I would like to call a very first world life in Japan, to come back to India, and also making the shift from the world of media agency or media planning and shift to a digital ad sales role, I did it with one single-minded focus, which was that I knew that digital was the path to growth. Okay, digital was just kind of blossoming in our country at that point of time, and ad sales within that field was one experience which I believed would add value, because that was one skill set that I was lacking at that point of time. Each of the times that I have made a shift, either in terms of location or in terms of role and responsibility, of course there has been a lot of dissonance.
Sure.
Because each time you make change in your life, there is a lot of change, there is a lot of pain that comes through that transformation. But I believe that each time I have gained much more, both professionally as well as personally, which is much more than the discomfort that I went through. But just to answer your question about the transformation and coming back to the question that you raised, it was never a plan for me. Each time it's really about enjoying the journey. It's about enjoying the opportunities and the experiences that come with those opportunities. And really, just to summarize it, it's like the journey is more important than the destination.
Great. So talking about cultural landscapes, right? You worked in Japan, you worked in India. How would you describe the Japanese work culture vis-a-vis Indian work culture, and what were the learnings that you actually derived from each of them?
So, okay, over the course of my career and with exposure to a different work environment, different teams and different locations, I would personally say that yes, there has been a distinct shift in my leadership style, if I were to call it. Okay, in the initial years of my career, or the first decade, I was much more exposed to and developed what I could possibly term a more Western brand of management or leadership, which is where communication is very top down, decision making is much more individualized, and there is no holding back even from very vocal disagreements if one may choose to kind of venture into that path. The focus for me always at that point of time was efficiency of decision making, getting the job done as quickly as possible. In my next decade, once I moved to Japan, spent some time over there, etc., and I experienced a very different culture. Okay, I found a very, very different management style existing over there, which I thought resonated much more with my personal values. There, the importance is much more on decision making by participation, decision making by consensus. Okay, communication, which is both top down, bottoms up, and also the usage of multiple informal channels of communication. So unlike the West, where there's a leader who takes a decision and then that's communicated down the rank and file, here is much more about taking the group along with you, and that's something that I picked up. The innate nature of Japanese decision making is to avoid confrontation and focus on what you call, say, group harmony. And it's really a collective sharing of responsibility for anything that needs to be delivered. So these values are what I intuitively relate to, and these aspects are now prominent in my management style with my team.
So, I mean, you so beautifully describe both the cultures and the best of both worlds, right? But what were the challenges and setbacks that came your way, and how did you really navigate through them?
I think so. Before I moved to Tokyo, okay. So one aspect which works very beautifully in India, but may possibly not work somewhere else, is the Indian concept of jugaad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What is Indian concept of jugaad? It's essentially about being street smart in terms of what you want to achieve. It may also mean bending the rules, for example, and trying to find shortcuts, so to speak, in how to get where you want to go, so to, right? The Japanese way of working is absolutely the polarized opposite of that. Okay. For example, if I had to go from point A to point B, or say, let's say point 1 to point 10 in a certain project, in Japan, the team would not even move from point 1 to point 2 until they figured out every barrier which is possible, which they may need to encounter in the journey from point 1 to point 10. So until you figure out every challenge and what is the mitigation of the challenge, you don't really kind of start. What that leads to is a little bit reduction in the pace of execution, because you're waiting to ensure that every scenario which is possible of what can go wrong, you thought through.
You're trying to be a perfectionist.
You are a perfectionist, you are very detail oriented, and you focus on ensuring you thought through every scenario before you get into execution, but then your execution is flawless. If you compare that to what is Indian jugaad, even if I don't know how to move from point 1 to point 10 and I have figured out my life only from point 1 to point 3, I kick off the project. And there I think of when I reach point 3, then I'll figure out how to move from point 3 to point 6. What that means is you may start your projects faster, but you very likely you will encounter many more challenges during the course of execution. Things which are like barriers to progress, which you may have not thought of. So it's a very, very different approach to work. And those were some of the challenges in terms of just the way I approached my own deliverables, okay, which I had to kind of recast the way I was thinking, the way I was planning, the way I was allocating work. So these were some of the challenges that I faced initially.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Hemen, you spoke about the Indian jugaad as well as how Japanese culture is all about being the perfectionist. But you were pretty much the country manager, a leader out there. So, was it that you were adapting to the culture, or you made the team adapt to the way you actually, wanted the team to maneuver?
No, I definitely believe that one needs to adapt to new ways of working. One can't hold good to one's assumption saying that if I had certain core strengths or certain ways of working, which helped me grow in my deliverables or helped me in my journey in India, it's not necessarily the same thing that is going to work over there. So in different cultures, different environments, you kind of pull in and you have to develop a different muscle. And my focus in the first 1 year was truly to kind of understand Japanese culture. So not just from a work point of view, but what is Japanese business culture, for example? How does one engage with clients? How does one engage with the team? How does one take decisions in a way that the team is motivated to work together? So I focused a lot more on understanding the culture in my first year before I actually got comfortable with the fact that yes, I do understand how to conduct business in Japan.
So, when it comes to actually understanding the industry trends, which would be quite different from the way it was in India, right? Keeping abreast of the overall business landscape, as well as ensuring that, so does your team. How do you really manage that?
So let me talk to you about two terms that I learned in my early days at Google. Okay, the first one is called drinking from the fire hose. What it essentially refers to is when you are new in a certain environment and in a new organization, in a different culture, you are faced with an overload of information, you're faced with an overload of responsibility and work by itself. Okay, And while this made me uncomfortable initially, over a point of time, I realized that this was something which was not unique only to me. It was something that everybody around me also experienced. The feeling of drinking from a fire hose actually helped me in two ways. The first one was it helped me realize that I don't need to overburden myself with that expectation that I was having of me, because the pace of change in the product itself, okay, was so fast that it's not possible at any point of time for one to know everything about every aspect of the product. Therefore, after some thinking, I picked up two things. I created my own learning pace, which I held myself accountable to. And the second part, in terms of managing this situation, was the fact that it helped me really ruthlessly prioritize amongst everything which was making a demand on my time. So the first one is around what I call drinking from the fire hose. The second one is really embracing a culture of being comfortable with your own discomfort. The fact is that we all put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and we try to shy away from situations where there is a lot of ambiguity or things which are uncertain. But just embracing these situations where you feel that you don't know enough and thinking of them as opportunities for growth, opportunities for learning, made me feel much more comfortable with the discomfort that I own experienced, okay, especially in my first year at Google. So on a day-on-day basis, I deliberately try to kind of come out of my comfort zone, and I focus on 2-3 things. So one is to take initiative when it's not even asked for, and you just kind of take on things which nobody is doing, and you find a reason to be involved in multiple projects. The second one is volunteering, especially when somebody asks you for some help. The third one is maybe mentoring somebody, okay, or taking some sort of a unofficial lead, so that one is involved in new and different things without having the burden of an official responsibility. I think every organization has a lot of L&D resources, and I make it a point to kind of learn something new once in a year, some sort of a course at all. And that's true for me both from professional as well as personal front. Like during the time of COVID, I finished my N5 and my N4 Japanese kind of course over just online classes, because anyway there was enough time for me to pursue even a personal kind of interest at that point of time.
So, Hemen, being a part of globalized matrix organization, you have led diverse teams. Right?
Yeah.
How do you manage such multidisciplinary teams, and how do you really empower them as well as motivate them?
Let me tell you about a concept that I learned in Tokyo, which is around the concept of nemawashi. Nemawashi essentially is around art of transplanting a tree from one location to the other. When they are actually moving a tree, it's very important that the tree doesn't get damaged, right? The roots don't get damaged, otherwise it can't live in the new environment. So it's really the art of digging around the roots in a way that you don't damage the system around each of the roots. So you kind of dig around each root independently in a way that the root system stays alive, and it can be safely be transported and planted into a new environment, new soil, etc. In business, nemawashi is around the art of consensus building. So the way it works over there, and what I saw very different from the Western way of working, where there's a lot of top-down communication.
Yes.
So each time there's a new proposal or a presentation to be taken, communication happens both with management as well as with each stakeholder who may be influenced by that decision. The second role of the leader over there is to preempt resistance, preempt barriers, preempt certain challenges which may come about if one were to take that certain decision. Therefore, what's the impact of that decision on every stakeholder? those challenges need to be mitigated even before that presentation happens or a certain decision is announced. The third one is taking inputs from every stakeholder. So it's not just important to communicate your ideas top down, bottom up, etc., but ensure that the interests of every stakeholder are taken into account. And finally, when the actual presentation happens or the decision is taken, it actually is supposed to take into account every aspect of what the organization priorities are, and it's taken into account considering the risk, the interests of every stakeholder. In this way, Japanese ensure that each time a new decision or change management is to be undertaken, they are breaking down resistance to that change in a very, very informal way and then implementing it, versus in a situation where somebody could take a decision and then just expect people to go ahead and implement it. I picked up 3 or 4 things from this. The first one is it's very important to understand who does what and why. So what's the role of every team? What's the role of every individual? Okay. The second one is there's always something that one can learn from each other, right? So give importance to what each team or each team member can contribute. The third one is being respectful of what we call divergent rules, divergent opinions. So it's not my way or the highway, as much as that, yes, if somebody has a very different opinion, how can one incorporate that into what one is trying to achieve? The fourth one with multidisciplinary teams is people don't appreciate jargon, because not every team understands what's the nomenclature, what's the language of the other team. So take that out. And the last one is make use of as many communication channels, whether they are tech related communication channels like video calls, for example, especially if you're leading teams which are based in multiple locations. Okay, so use as much of communication channels as possible to bring down resistance and get people together towards what you want to achieve. So those are some lessons which I picked up, which helped me kind of lead multidisciplinary teams.
Great, that's truly amazing. And I can't just help but wonder that, you get such strong leadership traits on the table. It's so inspiring. How about a mentor that you had? Did you have a mentor or a leader that you look up to, from where you've actually gained inspiration from?
So I've been quite fortunate to work with, what I would define as great business leaders, but who were also good human beings. So I just believe I've been fortunate. I would say that from some of my managers in Group M, I learned the importance of empathy. And I believe it's a very undervalued trait, but it's something that very strongly resonates with my core beliefs, and I picked it up from them. When I was in Google, I picked up 10x thinking, okay, and a very healthy appreciation for a growth mindset, okay. And I would say from my colleagues in Japan, I picked up 2 things. One is around detail orientation, and the second one is clarity of thought. To ask the minutest of questions, to be 100% sure of what one is saying and what one is trying to achieve. So I would say I learned something from every individual whom I kind of worked with. If I were to answer, then the one person whom I look up to is Mr. Ratan Tata, more for his, I would say, humility, his vision, and even his decisiveness. It's about drawing inspiration from everything that I see around me.
Sure. And could you elaborate on the 10x thinking that you just mentioned?
So, when I was in the media agency world, okay, our industry grows at the rate of 8%, 10%, right, year on year. ADX growth at, if it's double digit at even 15%, it's supposed to be great. Okay, what I learned at both Disney as well as Google is to break all barriers and to believe nothing is impossible. So 15% growth is not good enough, especially in the tech world, where you can multiply your number of users by millions through a great product. Okay.
Right.
One has to have a healthy level of dissatisfaction with the status quo. And how can one think in terms of growth, which is like 5x growth, 10x growth, is something which was actively encouraged. And that's something that I picked up over there.
So that has been really insightful. And now it's time to get the audience voice into our conversation. With this, we move to our next segment called the Janta Unfiltered,
Okay.
where we call in queries from our audiences and put it across to our guest as is, completely unfiltered, because this podcast is all about unfiltered conversation. So I'm going to read out one of the queries that our guest has sent in.
Yeah.
And, with your permission, let me just read
Sure.
it out to you. So, Hemen, this question has come in from Meher from Bombay. And the question is, in media, crisis would be unavoidable. Can you share a time when you had to navigate a crisis situation, and what was your approach to it? How did you navigate out of it?
So this question takes me back to 2021 when we had the second wave of COVID in the country. So the country had bounced back from the first wave, and just as things were coming back to normal, we experienced wave 2, which started sometime in Feb, March, etc. There was a lot of expectation around IPL because cricket is actually a great aggregator of audiences. Cricket also resonates with the mood of the nation. When India plays well, cricket is something that gets a lot of cheers for the country. And IPL, where the players are representative of multiple geographies in the country, it actually was something that audiences were looking up to, especially because it had become the respite from the very, very depressing environment, the health crisis which was around us. And at that point of time, because of the second wave, the government asked us to pause on 30th April, and we had only finished 4 weeks of IPL. The crisis was that there was a lot of advertising dollars which had already got booked through IPL. Okay. And we had to actually reassure our advertisers not to cancel their bookings, that we worked very closely with BCCI, the government authorities, etc. And a decision was taken that we would just pause the IPL, but it would come back on again in end September.
Okay.
Right. So this was a crisis of unimagined proportions where the health of the entire country was at stake. And at the same time, there was this event which was actually something which all audiences were looking up to, all advertisers were looking up to. And with just a couple of days notice, we were asked to stop everything.
Oh my God.
Yes. So at that point of time, constant communication with our advertisers, reassuring them that their money was safe. Okay, ensuring that they did not lose any money. Those who were interested in, we gave them the option of continuing.
Sure.
If somebody was not interested in continuing, we found other ways to ensure that they got their money's worth and they got their money back, etc. Was a big crisis which we had to address at that point of time.
Thank you so much, Hemen, for answering that question in so much detail. All right, Hemen. So now we move on to a fun segment, which is called 60-second spin, because leaders are allowed to have some fun as well.
Yes.
In this segment, I'm going to throw some questions at you, and you have to ensure that you answer as many questions as possible within a span of 60 seconds.
Okay.
So are you ready to come along for a spin with me?
Absolutely.
Great. Let's begin. Favorite childhood memory that never fails to make you smile?
Eating condensed milk at Mud Island.
If you could magically acquire one new skill overnight to enhance your leadership abilities, what would it be?
Learning new languages.
If you could eliminate one common workplace practice or tradition, what would it be and why?
Any sort of workplace discrimination.
Your favorite book and what impact has it had on your life?
I've read The Alchemist by Paul Coelho multiple times, and it's actually something that I resonate with, because it's about seeking an adventure, right? In that, the protagonist is the one who's searching for a certain treasure. For me, I'm just looking for new experiences, but that's something that I can relate to.
Interesting. Imagine if you were stuck in an elevator with Mr. Walter Disney. What would you ask him?
I want to ask him the story of how did he think of Mickey Mouse.
Great. And with that, 60 seconds are over, and you did pretty well, I must say, Hemen.
Thank you, Bhavna.
Great. With this, we move to our last segment
Okay.
and a concluding note, which is called Expert Edge, wherein I would like you to share one quick thought on why leadership fails and one mantra for being an effective leader.
So I think a lot of leaders count on the muscle that they've built over a period of time, and they go back to certain experiences which they've had when they are faced with challenging situations. But the world is changing so quickly, so it's not necessary that the experiences of the past can help you arrive at a solve for a situation in the present. So it's very, very important to keep learning, keep listening to your customer, and to me, there lies the root of the solution, just to keep listening.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Hemen. I think that was incredible. The way you shared your journey, opened up on the challenges and the setbacks that you've navigated, as well as also spoken to us about diverse cultures and managing multidisciplinary teams. Really appreciate you being here. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's been an honor.
Thank you to our audience for staying with us. Hope you found inspiration in this conversation. If yes, do like, share it with your fellow leaders, and drop a comment. Leave us one thought in terms of what's the key takeaway that you've learned today. We would be eagerly waiting to know your thoughts, whether it is about navigating challenges, adapting to change, or fostering innovation. Do let us know. Stay tuned for our next episode, packed with inspiring stories, expert insights, and maybe a bit of surprise as well. Until then, all you leaders out there, keep slaying, keep inspiring, and continue leading the way. This is me, Bhavna Lalchandani, signing off.